And good morning, everybody, and welcome to Sunday School. I'm Mike Carey, pastor of the First United Methodist Church of Nevada, Iowa, the scenic center of Iowa. It's my privilege and joy to be able to spend a little time in the Word of God with you today. Sorry for getting on just a couple minutes late there, but some days you get the bear, and some days the bear gets you. And the bear was getting me today in terms of being able to get things done and get down here to be able to join you, and uh, and that's okay. That's part of what the ministry is all about. So if occasionally I am a little slow getting on, and I got to kind of fiddle around with things here because I'm slow getting on. That's usually going to be the reason why. Is that I got tied up with other stuff upstairs, and being a communion Sunday, just was for some reason a little bit on the busy side, and which is good, which is a wonderful thing, by the way. We had a crowd today that was more like what it should be in terms of being post COVID now. Although COVID isn't really done, we're not past it, but we're dealing with it, we're managing it, and we had people, and I think everybody came down to receive communion the way we usually have. Those of us who were serving were masked, just to be on the safe side of things, but it was a glorious time. And for some folks, it's almost like we'd forgotten how to do it. To come down the aisle and to receive the sacrament like that. And so it was an absolutely joyous and wonderful occasion in the life of the church. It's like finally we can get back together and we can do this. So I'm praising the good Lord for that, and for the for our people who they're willing to say, yeah, let's get going, let's get back at this stuff again. So we're thankful to the Lord for that today. And we are, for this class now, in at least through Lent, and probably, I'm going to guess, at least through the end of May, through Sunday school. We're going to be working our way through the Gospel of John. Now, I'm utilizing a study that is been put together by Adam Hamilton. You can tell I'm an Adam Hamilton fan. That's basically what I've been using over the last several years here. And the reason for that is that he's very practical in terms of what he puts together. And just, I feel comfortable with his stuff. However, with this one, Adam focuses on some of the major themes of John's gospel. And that's good because he's doing what's called a topical study, and he covers those basic themes. I want to do that, but I also want to go a little bit more in depth into, for example, background to help us understand John a little bit more thoroughly, not just cover some of the basic thematic material that we find there, but also some of the nuts and bolts as well. So that's what we're going to be doing. We've already started. We've done an introduction. And you have to forgive me because I need that next cup of coffee now this morning. It's just one of those days. But the sun's out. We're happy and praising God for that. It's a little on the coolish side after last night's tornadoes. I commend those situations to you, to your prayerful attention. The last reports that I heard down in the Winterset area, Madison County area, 6 people died with the twisters last night. There are at least 4 injured, 1 critically. I have not. That was last night, late, that I saw that. I haven't seen anything updated this morning yet. I'm assuming that it has been. It's children are also among the fatalities, so keep that situation before the Lord in your prayers and in your hearts. And in fact, as we get started here this morning, why don't we spend a moment in prayer? Would you pray with me? Loving God, we praise you now and give thanks for this Sabbath that we can come together before you. We lift up our friends down in the southern part of the state, down around Madison County and other places that were hit by tornadoes last night. We pray for their well-being. We pray for their property and the damages that have been done, that we lift them up and that you would be their comfort and their encouragement. We pray for families that have lost loved ones because of this. We ask that you would encourage them and watch over them in these days as we ask your blessing upon them in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. Now, what we're going to do is, as we look at John, we're going to break John down into smaller pieces than what Adam Hamilton does in his particular study. And first of all, I'm going to read larger sections of John for our edification. Then I'm going to go back and break them up a little bit and consider what it is that John is talking about. Because John is, without question, different when it comes to the gospel writings. He is unique, and his also what he's trying to accomplish is different than the other gospel writings, and that's one reason why he is just basically is a different breed of cat. So, starting now, we've done the background information, or the introduction, and we're now going to get into the text itself. John chapter 1, verse 1. Now, I'm going to read 18 verses here, which is a little bit long, but this is what is known as the prologue of John, his beginning. And in it, well, he gives us a lot of information, and we'll go down and we'll break it into bite-sized pieces. But John 1, the first 18 verses. Now, when the world had its beginning, the Word, capital W, was already there. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This Word was in the beginning with God. He was the agent through whom all things were made. And there is not a single thing that exists in this world which came into being without him. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, because the darkness has never been able to conquer it. And there emerged a man sent from God, whose name was John, meaning John the Baptist. He came as a witness, in order to bear witness to the light, that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. His function was to bear witness to the light. He was the real light, who, in his coming into the world, gives light to every man. He was in the world, and although the world was made by him, the world did not recognize him. It was into his own home that he came, and yet his own people did not receive him. To all those who did receive him, to those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. These were born not of blood, nor of any human impulse, nor of any man's will, but their birth was of God. So the Word became a person and took up his abode in our being, full of grace and truth, and we beheld his glory, glory such as an only Son receives from his Father. John was his witness, for he cried, "This is he of whom I said to you, he who comes after me has been advanced before me, because he was before me. On his fullness we all of us have drawn, and we have received grace upon grace, because it is the law which was given by Moses. But grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is the unique one, he who is God, he who is in the bosom of the Father, who has told us all about God." Now, you see what I mean? That's a mouthful. That's a lot to get your head around. And that's why we're going to break it down into more bite-sized pieces. But we have to consider what John now is talking about when he refers to the Word. This is really an amazing piece of work that we're dealing with here in John's Gospel. We have to remember, Christianity began in Judaism. Jesus was a Jew who spent the bulk of his life in Palestine. We only have a couple of references that have him going outside the country, and even there he didn't go very far. He went over to Decapolis, which means the 10 cities, which were over to the east and a little north of the Sea of Galilee, so that's not very far. And he also went up to Syrophoenicia, up to the ports of Tyre and Sidon, that particular area. And other than that, except as a baby, when he went down to Egypt, taken by his parents, and stayed there a few years until Herod died. Those are his only times outside of the country. He is a Jew. And Christianity begins as a sect of Judaism. Like the old poem I keep saying to you, roses are red, violets are bluish. If it weren't for Christmas, we'd all be Jewish. And so that's where it comes from. So, but what happened is now, within 30 years of Jesus' death and resurrection, Christianity had basically exploded. It had traveled to what we know today as modern day Turkey, Asia Minor, as it was called back then, Greece, and into the Roman Empire, into Rome itself. By 60 AD, it's estimated that for every Jewish Christian, there was 100,000 Gentile Christians in the church, and it was growing faster and faster all the time. Now, the problem with this is that Greeks think a certain way, and Jews think another way. Now, if you think this is, what's the big deal with that? When you start to compare, for example, the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church, you begin to see, well, shouldn't they be similar? Well, remember, they split around 1100 AD, and it was basically along the lines of the people to the east, Turkey and on east, around the Mediterranean, think one way, and the people to the west, into Greece and Rome, Italy, they think a different way. And it's hard to explain, but once you begin to see the way they worship and the way their theology develops, the Eastern mindset is much more mystically oriented than the Western way of thinking. And so it's not unusual at all, the fact that Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity split when they did, simply because the way people think, it's just different, the way they understand things. And that was part of the situation that John is trying to deal with, because the church is couched in Judaism, but it's going out to the Gentiles. And so he had to figure out a way to be able to appeal to both of those particular mindsets. Because, for just an example, the Greeks did not understand the whole idea of Messiah. And you see that in Matthew's Gospel, for example, because Matthew is written to Christians coming out of a Jewish background. The Jewish flavor in Matthew is very, very strong. And that's one of the terms that gets used there a lot, is Messiah. The Greeks did not understand that whole concept at all. And so John's going, well, how do I explain this then? Another reason to change that we see at this point in time is that the first great church council, which we see in the book of Acts, which is the Great Jerusalem Council, changed the way that things were happening in the church. The Apostle Paul and Peter both came back, and there were probably others as well, but those are the two we're told about, came back and said that the gospel is going forth amongst the Gentiles. And what Paul especially said is, and I have not made it, the whole idea of circumcision and the Jewish dietary restrictions, I have not made those a stumbling block to the Gentile Christians. In fact, I have eliminated them. I have not taught those to people at all. And if you want Christianity to continue to grow, you need to do something about that. And so what the First Jerusalem Council did was they did away, when it came to evangelism and getting people to convert to Christianity, they eliminated the need for Gentiles to come through Judaism. Because the idea was, for most, is that first you had to become Jewish, then you could become Christian. Well, that means not only did you have to keep the law and the dietary restrictions, you also had to be circumcised, which would be a big deal breaker for a lot of people. And so the early church leadership realized this to their credit, and so they eliminated that. Now, what you have to understand is that they did that not only because the idea of circumcision would be difficult. It said you're going to do what to me? You got to do what? But also that is a very Jewish thing, and they're saying we don't need that. For people to come to Christ, we don't need for that to happen. That is unnecessary. But for anybody that was coming to Christ out of a Jewish background, that would be huge, huge. You and I cannot even begin to understand how big of a deal that would be for Jewish Christians. Now, to the credit, many of the church elders that were present there at the First Jerusalem Council were Jewish Christians, and yet they were willing to take that step in order to accommodate Gentiles and facilitate the growth of the church. They decided these things are not essential. And I wish the church today would get that into their head as well. There are some things that are essential, and there are some things that simply are not essential anymore. But legalism dies hard. So anyway, that is that's one of the things that Paul was doing. Paul, who was a Jew, and he describes himself as a Pharisee of Pharisees. I'm about as Jewish can get, and yet he says, I think this is what we need to do. We need to abandon the whole Jewish aspect of this and just simply have people come to Christ by faith. That was a big deal. And it was an ongoing problem in the church for a long time, because after Paul went back out in his second missionary journey, there were those people who disagreed with that, who dogged his tracks and were coming into the churches he would establish, and they would try to get people to go the Jewish route. They would say, no, you're not complete. You need to hear this aspect of the gospel. Paul refers to it as those who are preaching another gospel, contrary to the gospel that he believed and he was preaching. And so we have that whole idea. And one of the problems with doing this on a computer is that every once in a while, I have little things that keep popping up saying, do this or do that. And I'm not going to do this or do that. Leave me alone here. Quit popping up, and I've got to kind of take my attention away and get them off the screen because they're distracting. But so that's one of the things that John is trying to get across to us here in chapter 1 in his prologue. The whole idea now here of logos, the word. He says, and the word was with God. And let me just focus back on that for a second. The word was already there. The word was with God. The word was God. This word was in the beginning with God. So, and it's capital W, this word. This logos is the Greek word that is spoken here. This is the spoken word. The spoken word, to both Greek and Jew, had power. This logos is a living, powerful thing. We see that in Jewish thinking. You go back to the book of Genesis, in Genesis 27, where you had the twins, Isaac and Esau, who were, with Esau being the eldest, and therefore he was entitled to his father's blessing and a majority of the inheritance. However, for some reason, their mother decided that, mom always liked you best, even with twins. She favored Jacob over Esau, and so you have the story of Jacob stealing his brother's blessing from his father, because his father was almost blind in his elder years. And so Esau, being a hairy man, he put on Esau's clothes and animal skins, so that when his father felt and smelled him, it would smell indeed like Esau. And so he spoke his blessing, his parental blessing, upon Jacob accidentally instead of Esau. And Esau, when he finds this out, is very, very upset and says, is there no blessing for me? And Isaac, excuse me, yeah, Isaac says, I can't take it back. Once the blessing is given, once the word goes forth, and you can't take it back, which is, so there was no blessing for Esau, which I wish people would learn today. Once a word is spoken, it's out there. You can't take it back. If you err somehow, some way, and say something you shouldn't, you can always apologize for that, I suppose. But, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Not true. Words matter. Words are powerful. When you go to again, into Genesis chapter 1, which is the story of creation, every one of the creative acts are prefaced with God said, God spoke, and it happened. That was creation. And so the Word of God is creative and is powerful. Let me just read here. Every once in a while, I want to read here in terms of just how powerful the Word is. God said the Word of God is a creating power. It goes forth. You see that also in the Psalms. In Psalm 33:6, He sent forth His Word and healed them. Psalm 147, He spoke forth His commands to the earth, and His word runs swiftly. So Isaiah 55, so shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and prosper in the way in which I sent it. And, there are Old Testament after Old Testament references here to the Word of God being powerful, being creative, being positive. The Word, the same Word, is also associated when you get into the book of Proverbs. Just a couple of the Proverbs is also associated with wisdom. Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom, a female term which some female theologians have picked up on and kind of turned it into something that I don't agree with. Talking about Sophia as almost it was a separate God and equal to God the Father. But for example, Proverbs 3 verses 13 through 26. Speaking of wisdom, she is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called happy. The Lord, by wisdom, Sophia, founded the earth, and by understanding He established the heavens. By His knowledge the deeps broke forth, and the clouds dropped down the dew. And there's a couple of other references in Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 4 and Proverbs chapter 8, that talks about wisdom being equated to the Word, to the Logos. And as I said, there are some who incorrectly think of this as a separate God from Jehovah God. But there it is. The Old Testament is full of Logos, the Word, being creative, being powerful. But this is Jewish thinking. And so what John is trying to do, he's trying to take this idea, this Jewish idea of the Word as being wisdom and reason, and he's trying to reconcile it with the Greek idea, which also has the word logos as well. You look throughout Greek philosophy, Heraclitus, for example, considered the Word to be the logos, considered to be the mind of God. The Stoics philosophers talked a lot about the logos as the order of the universe, the natural laws. And so you'll find that there with them as well. What John is saying in those first 18 verses is that to Jew and Greek, that Jesus is this creative, this positive, this controlling, sustaining mind of God come to earth. That's what he's trying to say to them. And he's trying to bring two different ways of thinking, two different mindsets together, which is hard. So that brings us up then to breaking it down into smaller bites here now. So the first two verses there, and just let me find them here and read them again now. When the world had its beginning, the Word was already there, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This Word was in the beginning with God. So now, John says three things about this Logos, about this Word, in which he is saying about Jesus Christ. He's saying, first of all, the Word has been there from the beginning. It was not created. The Word is not part of creation. The Word is a part of eternity, is a part of God, a part of the Godhead. And this is the idea that we refer to as the pre-existence of Christ, that he is one with the Father, one with the Spirit. And it means that God has always been there and Jesus has always been there. And this may then, we'll get into this not today, but I think next week, about the whole idea, well then, how do you explain the whole idea of the God of the Old Testament versus the God of the New Testament? Because, boy, they sure seem like they're totally different. The God of the Old Testament is rather stern, jealous, judgmental, and how does that equate with Jesus and saying that he has come to show to us who God is and what God is like? The whole idea of Jesus as the Son of God, as part of the Godhead, as being pre-existent, has just been something that the church has just really had to debate over the centuries, and actually still is. The first great church councils, the Council of Nicaea, for one particularly, would be the first really big church or council after the church had spread around the Mediterranean basin that deals with the whole idea of question is, who is Jesus Christ? Now you may think, well, Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He's the Messiah. What more do you need to know than that? Well, they wanted and they needed to try and explain that in rational terms. Say, well, you're not supposed to understand it rational terms. You're supposed to accept it by faith. Well, not everybody thinks that way. And so the whole development of the school of theology known as Christology, in other words, the theology of Jesus Christ. Theology is broken up into many different schools of thought. You have theology, which is the basic theology or understanding of God, God within the Godhead. Then you have Christology, which is the theology pertaining to Jesus Christ. Pneumatology is the theology regarding the Holy Spirit. Ecclesiology, there we go. Ecclesiology is the theology of the church and the development of church. Harmoniology is this theology of sin and how that all plays into everything. You get the idea. And there are many different ways of looking and doing theology. There's biblical theology, there's systematic theology, there's liberation theology. You say, wow, isn't that making things overly complicated? Well, I would tend to agree with you that yes, it is. I don't have a great deal of love for theologians because I think theology tends to divide us, but I also understand the need people have to explain things and try to understand things. I am more of a person who just takes it by faith. I guess maybe I'm a little simple-minded that way, but it is. It is what it is. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I accept that. I believe that because I've met him and I know him, and so I trust him. I've placed my trust in him. I've experienced the power of the Holy Spirit in my life, so I trust that. I believe that. But there are those folks, the Council of Nicaea was concerned about the essence of who is Jesus. That was the question that they were dealing with. And the emperor, Constantine, was the one who called the council because the arguments that they were having on this subject was basically tearing the church apart. And Constantine wanted Christianity to be part of the glue that held the empire together. And so he called them all together and basically said, until you guys come, the representatives of the various churches, said, until you guys come to an understanding and an agreement on this stuff, you aren't leaving. Shut the doors and lock them. Whoa. So when the emperor makes that kind of a demand, well, you better come up with something. And that began the whole debate, question, answers of the essence and the nature of Christ, who is Jesus Christ. Now, I've just bored you to tears, and I'm sorry about that, but that's part of what is being debated and considered there. And as to how does the God of the Old Testament equate to the God of the New Testament? Has God changed? No, I think our understanding of God has changed. But we'll get more into that as we move along here because I see we're just about running out of time here now. It also says in these first two verses, the Word was with God. Always there has been this close connection between God, God the Father, and the Word, the Logos, who is Jesus. And no one can tell us what God is like then better than Jesus, since he and the Father are as close can be, as most intimate terms of intimate terms. It also tells us that the Word was God. Jesus is of the same character, the same quality, the same essence and being as God the Father. And so he is so perfectly the same as God that by seeing him, you see God. You know what God is like. Jesus came to show us who and what God was really like. So in Jesus, we see all God, all that God is and was and always will be, all that God feels and desires for humanity, we see in Jesus Christ. So that's the first two verses, and like I said, I think I probably bored you to tears here because theology has a tendency to do that for people. So we're going to stop there, and we'll pick up the lesson then at verse 3 in chapter 1, and I'll mark my page here accordingly and get my little sticker out, and there we go. So that's where, as far as we'll go for today. So in the meantime, remember, my encouragement to you is to be reading the Gospel of John as part of this lesson preparation. If you want to read a chapter a day, I think that would be good. You'll get through John before we're done with the study, and so when that happens, go back and read it again. Because remember, this is the Word of God. It's inexhaustible. It has a lot of stuff. You'll see things going through the second or third time that you didn't see the first or second time. I guarantee you. And think about it. Put your consideration upon the ideas as to what is being said here about Jesus Christ, and how does it relate to me. So, in the meantime then, thanks for stopping by for Sunday school this morning. Hope the Lord blesses you then real good.